They're the gaming industry's greatest villain, a company synonymous with evil and malpractice. They buy out studios and kill them when the profits run out. They manipulate players into spending money using the dirtiest tricks in the book. They were voted the worst company in America 2 years in a row. But as other studios are shutting down in record numbers, Electronic Arts has managed to somehow push their profits higher and higher year after year. Which begs the question, how is a company so widely reviled by everyone still worth more than $40 billion? Like all great questions, it starts at the humblest of beginnings, long before EA became the evil empire we know today. It might surprise you to hear this, but when EA started out, they were one of the good guys. They were about creativity, respect. When Trip Hawkins started the company in 1982, he wanted video game developers to be revered as artists, on par with film directors and rock stars. A nod to their futuristic vision, EA's early ads featured the slogan, "We see farther." After a few fairly successful games with Skate or Die and Pinball Construction Set, Trip turned his attention to a genre that defines EA to this day, sports games. A fan of American football, Trip was obsessed with the idea of creating a realistic football simulation, something that wasn't on the market at the time. So, EA got Super Bowl winner and Hall of Famer John Madden to help out with the development process, creating the first Madden game in 1988. This Hail Mary would instantly turn into a touchdown, changing EA forever. The money started flooding in. Suddenly, corporate executives were approaching EA with promises of turning them into a gaming powerhouse. One of these execs was Larry Probst. Larry was a businessman first and foremost, who only cared about one thing: money. His approach to this new gaming thing involved buying small studios and absorbing them into the EA brand. These studios would make the games, EA would collect the profits. But getting this strategy off the ground would require a lot of money. So, EA went public on the stock exchange in 1989 with a valuation of 84 million USD, more than enough money to put Larry's business model into practice. But going public would be EA's first major turning point. When a company goes public, suddenly, they have an obligation to their shareholders and start to care less and less about their players. Business guys like Larry Probst love this because it means making more money. But for gaming purists who believe in video games as an art form, it's almost painful to see. Unsurprisingly, in 1991, Trip Hawkins left, and with him went the heart of the company. In his place, Larry Probst assumed the position of CEO and promoted another corporate executive, John Riccitiello, to be his right-hand man. Over the next 16 years, these two would mold EA from the innovative studio that treated developers as rock stars to an evil empire slowly taking over the world. Fast forward to 2007. Larry had been in charge of the company for the last 18 years and was incredibly successful, bringing EA's value up to $16 billion. But he was getting older, and it was time to step back. So, he became company chairman and gave up his CEO position to John Riccitiello. Riccitiello was just as ruthless as his previous master, and continued EA's tradition of gobbling up smaller game studios. This was a practice that had been hugely rewarding over the years. For example, EA bought Maxis, the creator of The Sims, back in 1997 for $125 million. 10 years later, The Sims franchise was selling 22 million copies in a year, making them one of EA's most valuable franchises and generating $1 billion in revenue. But for every successful acquisition, there were hundreds of studios that were destroyed by EA. EA's top priority was output and sales. Studios were purchased, presented with deadlines, forced to rush to meet these deadlines, and then if for some reason that game underperformed, the studio would be shut down altogether. Origin Systems, Bullfrog Productions, Westwood Studios, Pandemic Studios, Mythic Entertainment, Visceral Games, all victims of EA's business strategy. By the late 2000s, the graveyard of dismantled game studios had grown to the hundreds, earning EA the nickname of the Evil Empire. Gamers watched in despair as their favorite series were disfigured beyond recognition or outright cancelled under EA's watch. The company was quickly becoming a magnet for bad press, and their shareholders were not happy about the company literally being called evil. By April 2010, the company's value had dropped over $9 billion to $5.5 billion. Games were launching with content locked behind paywalls, and this new thing called microtransactions were starting to pop up more and more. In short, no one was happy with EA. It came to a head when EA won the Worst Company in America award from Consumerist not once, but twice in 2012 and 2013. EA beat out all the banks, oil companies, airlines, and other horrible companies in the world to win the title 2 years in a row. When asked about this public drubbing, EA's leadership tried to play it humble, saying, quote, "We take it seriously and want to see it change." EA's leadership noted that the company had started adjusting some unpopular policies. For instance, eliminating the dreaded online pass systems that forced used game buyers to pay extra fees and ensuring single-player games like The Sims 4 could be played offline. EA executive Frank Gibeau said, quote, "The point is, we are listening, and we are changing." But that was all fanfare, because in reality, EA wasn't listening. All they cared about was making more money, and everything else was secondary. One early flashpoint was Dead Space 3 in 2013, a $60 AAA title where they completely broke the immersive survival horror experience by having menus pop up asking players to buy crafting materials. But this was just the start. EA's mobile division took the franchise Dungeon Keeper and reimagined it as a free-to-play mobile game, which they then jam-packed full of so many microtransactions that the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK ruled that they were falsely advertising by calling the game free in the first place. With stories like these constantly in the news cycle, EA's stock prices started to plummet, and the blame fell squarely on John Riccitiello. With pressure from shareholders clamping down, Riccitiello stepped down as CEO in 2013. Taking his place was a young protege named Andrew Wilson, who promised a new era of financial stability by taking EA's evil practices to the next level. Wilson got his start at EA in 2000. A basketball and rugby player from Australia, Wilson's hands-on athletics experience made him a natural fit at EA Sports. In the early days, Wilson was known as a player-first kind of guy, excelling at creating games that were fun, realistic, and engaging, and he eventually worked his way up to the executive producer of FIFA, helping the franchise win 2 BAFTA awards in 2010. But during his climb to the top of the EA ladder, Wilson was personally mentored by Larry Probst, who inspired Wilson to become more like him, more like a businessman. So when Riccitiello stepped down and Wilson was named CEO in 2013, he set to work trying to make EA profitable again. What he did was popularize not one, but 2 of the most manipulative practices in the gaming industry, practices that we still haven't recovered from to this day. The first was everyone's favorite slot machine, the loot box. It started in FIFA as a simple idea, and a harmless one at that. Let players build a fantasy team of their favorite players and take them online against other fantasy teams. But rather than give people access to every player in the game, they'd have to earn players by trading with others or by opening packs. These packs were totally random and very addictive. This concept quickly evolved into the monstrosity that is FIFA Ultimate Team. Since having better players makes it easier to win games, players would open pack after pack after pack, hoping to unlock that one player that would help their team win. FIFA would also offer limited edition player cards that had boosted stats and looked really cool, and preyed on people's desires to get that shiny new thing. For many, pack opening became so addictive that they didn't even play the game. Like zombies at a slot machine, players would spend hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars just opening packs for the rush of getting a good card. The lights, the spectacle, the excitement, opening packs or any other loot boxes is a form of gambling. And we shouldn't have to tell you, but it's pretty evil. What makes it worse is that they're in a game marketed towards children. Stories quickly emerged of teenagers spending thousands of dollars of their parents' money opening FIFA packs. Gaming forums filled with tales of pack addiction, and the mechanic was quickly likened to a roulette table tucked into a soccer game. The controversy grew so intense that in 2018, authorities in Belgium and the Netherlands investigated big publishers for potential gambling law violations. These investigations were spurred in part by FIFA's loot box system. Belgium concluded that loot boxes were unregulated gambling and banned them outright. But EA wasn't about to let their cash cow get away from them so easily. In 2019, EA sent representatives to a UK parliamentary hearing. There, an EA executive gave a now legendary defense of loot boxes, claiming that EA prefers to call them surprise mechanics, and compared them to Kinder Surprise eggs that kids have enjoyed for years. The phrase surprise mechanics instantly became a meme. Media outlets and gamers skewered the comparison as tone deaf, but regardless of what people were saying, EA were going to defend their loot boxes because they were just too profitable to give up without a fight. Let's look at some numbers that back that up. In 2012, EA was valued at $4 billion. By 2017, they were valued at more than $32 billion. Ultimate Team modes in FIFA, NHL, and Madden made up around 30% of EA's revenue during this period, making a staggering $3 billion between 2015 and 2017, and proving that microtransactions were the way of the future. A reason these Ultimate Teams were so effective was EA Sports' annual release cycles. Let's consider Madden for a second. This is a franchise that has released a new installment every single year since 1990, with new features, game modes, and roster updates. In the 90s and 2000s, each new game looked way better than the last, so people were okay paying $40, $50, $60 if it meant the game was going to be way better than last year's iteration. But in 2004, EA signed an exclusive license with the NFL, making it so no one else could use NFL teams or players. EA effectively had a monopoly on the genre, and therefore had no incentive to continue innovating. Year after year, they put out the same game with minor changes, and sometimes put themselves in a position where the new game was actually worse than the previous iteration. By the late 2010s, full of buggy gameplay and neglected game modes, the phrase Madden stagnation had become a common refrain. In 2020, this long-simmering frustration reached a boiling point with Madden NFL 21, which would become one of the lowest-rated sports games in history. Users gave it a 0.4 out of 10 on Metacritic, and social media exploded with the hashtag #NFLDropEA. But the public outcry did not bother EA one bit. Despite what the fans were saying, Madden was still making money. EA's internal data showed that despite loud public outcry, Madden had a core group of fans who would buy the game year in and year out, no matter what, continuing to spend money on Ultimate Team modes from year to year. This is the contradiction at the heart of EA. They make games that get progressively worse with each iteration, and yet somehow make more and more money. Years of neglecting their player base should, by all logic, make the players leave. But for EA's sports games, the opposite was true. And under the hood, EA was using advanced psychological manipulation to convince players to stay. This is where things get evil. In the 2010s, EA changed the way they match players in online games. Up until this point, players would be matched based on their skill level or completely randomly. But EA wanted to make their matchmaking algorithms as addictive as possible, and committed huge sums of money to researching and developing more and more predatory systems. In a game like FIFA, if a player is on a losing streak, EA would intentionally match them with players worse than them to boost their egos and keep them playing. Conversely, if they were on a winning streak or about to be promoted, they would be matched with better players to frustrate them and make them lose.
The heat has made you powerful.
Being so close to promotion, this player would be much more likely to continue playing since they didn't get the satisfaction of a victory, and also more likely to spend money on packs to make their team better. This paper, published with EA affiliations in 2017, outlines what I just described as an engagement-optimized matchmaking framework. The paper's abstract describes how current matchmaking systems depend on a single core strategy: create fair games at all times. However, the paper asserts that matchmaking based on fairness is not optimal for engagement, because, why would I want to be matched with someone of my own skill level? But matchmaking algorithms were just the tip of the iceberg. In 2016, EA patented a game mechanic called dynamic difficulty adjustment. Essentially, they would fine-tune aspects of a game's difficulty in real time in accordance with certain goals. Maybe a player is stuck on a difficult level of a game, and the game subtly lowers enemy damage to help them out. Or maybe a player's aim is all over the place, so the game ups aim assist to help them shoot better. In single-player games, it's fine. But what if it's used in a multiplayer game? In 2020, a group of FIFA players filed a class action lawsuit alleging that EA secretly used dynamic difficulty adjustments in FIFA and Madden to make players lose games. The lawsuit claimed that EA's algorithm would make your team underperform in key moments, slowing them down or decreasing their accuracy, so the players would get frustrated and spend money to buy better players. Given how frequently the AI in these games seemed to stop working for no reason at all, it's unsurprising that players felt like something was up. However, EA ended up winning this particular lawsuit, proving to the plaintiffs that DDA was not used in the context they were claiming. Still, the fact that EA filed a patent on DDA was a huge red flag for many members of the hardcore FIFA community. Despite concerns being raised by diehard fans, casual gamers were still spending more money on EA than ever before. But in a moment of hubris, they took it a little bit too far, resulting in one of the most catastrophic media firestorms the gaming industry had ever seen. In 2017, EA was in the middle of rebooting one of the most beloved franchises of all time, Star Wars Battlefront. A sequel to the reboot was set to come out in November, and many were excited to see if it would live up to expectations. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Star Wars Battlefront II would become one of the most despised games of all time. Not because it wasn't fun, or because EA pushed it out the door before it was finished, but because after paying $60 for the game, players were confronted with some of the worst loot boxes they'd ever seen. To unlock a single hero, Darth Vader for example, players would have to grind for around 40 hours of in-game time. And that's just to unlock one hero. Multiply this across every hero in the game, and it became clear that unlocking the full cast by just playing the game was simply impossible. When players realized this, they took to social media, and the backlash was immense. Hashtags like boycott EA were trending. The game's publishers quickly took to Reddit to help soothe players' frustrations, but ended up dropping what would become the single most downvoted comment in Reddit history. In response to the Darth Vader controversy, one spokesperson said, quote, "The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes." This comment was downvoted so many times, it actually made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. So, if players couldn't unlock heroes by regular means, what were they expected to do? Well, EA graciously provided them with loot boxes. Once you got tired of grinding 40 hours for a hero, you could spend money on loot boxes with no promise that you would actually get the hero you wanted. This could cost hundreds of dollars, and to make matters worse, the loot boxes also contained power-ups that gave gameplay advantages, meaning those who bought loot boxes would have an advantage on players who didn't. The Star Wars Battlefront II loot box debacle became a public relations catastrophe for EA. And it wasn't just confined to angry forum posts. Major news outlets picked up the story. Politicians cited it as Exhibit A of a gambling problem in games. And even Disney, which owns the Star Wars IP, intervened behind the scenes, with the Disney CEO personally calling EA to express disapproval about the public backlash, which led to EA temporarily disabling all in-game microtransactions before the game's release. For once, it seemed that gamer anger had actually forced immediate change. Battlefront II launched with reworked progression, and over the next few months, EA revamped the game to remove pay-to-win elements entirely. But this victory came at a cost. EA later admitted the backlash and removal of microtransactions led to Battlefront II missing sales targets by 10%. Finally, it seemed like players had made their voices heard and enacted some real change. But in reality, this debacle just sent EA back to the drawing board, where they devised a new strategy to get players to spend money. It was called GaaS, Games as a Service. Rather than owning the game you just bought, EA wanted to create a live service experience that players would spend money on over long periods of time. As we talked about earlier, Ultimate Team modes completely changed the way EA made games, inspiring them to put loot boxes in basically everything. Games as a Service had the same effect, where EA decided that only games that could be monetized with live service features were worth making, and they started shutting down anything that didn't fit this new model, including game studios. In 2017, Visceral Games was developing a secretive single-player Star Wars adventure called Ragtag, led by renowned director Amy Hennig. Fans were excited for a linear, story-focused Star Wars game that played something like an interactive Uncharted, but EA abruptly shut it down mid-project, citing a need to, quote, pivot the design of the Star Wars title. In a carefully worded statement, EA explained that they were tracking player feedback and market trends, and decided instead to make a game that players would, quote, want to come back to for a long time to come. But not only did EA shut down the game, they shut down the entire studio. The shuttering of Visceral, a studio famous for the Dead Space series, signaled EA's full commitment to games as a service. If a project didn't have a clear way to keep players coming back and spending money, EA wasn't going to make it. And unfortunately, they were right about games as a service being more profitable. In 2019, they released Apex Legends, a free-to-play battle royale. In its first month, Apex raked in $92 million, basically all from cosmetics. This made it the most profitable launch month for any free-to-play game ever. 1 month later, they introduced a battle pass where players could spend around $10 for a season's worth of cosmetics, and their revenue skyrocketed yet again. By May 2022, the game surpassed the $2 billion mark, and in May 2024, they were at $3.4 billion. Thus, their games as a service hypothesis was confirmed. It's much more profitable to create an ongoing game and rely on microtransactions than to develop and release new games. Sure, every now and then they'd put out an anthem that completely failed to meet expectations, but even that couldn't put a dent in EA's revenue stream. EA's success can be chalked up to one thing: an unwavering commitment to corporate shareholders. They'll do anything to keep profits going up, and their stock price is high. They introduced loot boxes as a way to siphon money away from players. They developed games as a service to keep revenue streams open over long periods of time. They frequently shut down studios after a single flop, and are even willing to sacrifice their own employees if it means keeping the company in the black. Despite record sales between 2023 and 2025, EA laid off approximately 1,900 employees. This included the closure of Industrial Toys, cuts to Codemasters, a huge wave of layoffs at BioWare, and the cancellation of a highly anticipated Black Panther game. In response, CEO Andrew Wilson said, quote, "As we drive greater focus across our portfolio, we are moving away from projects that do not contribute to our strategy. Clearly, the human beings who make up the company do not contribute to that strategy." In March 2023, EA released their quarterly financial report in which Wilson claimed the company was, quote, "operating from a position of strength and gaining momentum," as well as a gross profit of $1.3 billion that quarter. A few paragraphs later, he also announced that EA was laying off 6% of their workforce. The disconnect between increasing profits and paring away employees is incredibly painful. They have enough money to keep these people employed and these studios open, but doing so would make the company look less valuable to shareholders. So they simply let them go. EA has fully embraced the dark side. Where Trip Hawkins wanted to create rock stars, Andrew Wilson created slot machines. Where players were once put first, algorithms and profits now reign supreme. And despite being called the worst company in America 2 years in a row, EA is still worth more than $40 billion.